Minnesota Early Childhood Risk and Reach Report, recognize a lot of faces. My name is Elizabeth or Betty Carlson. I'm the director of the Harris program at the University of Minnesota. And on behalf of the university and Wilder Research and our partners at the Department of Health and Education and Human Services, I want to welcome all of you. The report that we're going to be reviewing today is the result of this partnership and a result of many years of professional experience, work across geography and even state lines, and an effort to link research and policy and practice. We all view this report as one step in a collective effort to gather and integrate data and develop policy that meets the needs of young children and their families in Minnesota. Before we begin, I want to extend a special thanks to many people here who participated in this report in particular. Many people who served on the advisory committee who helped either gathering data or analyzing data, who wrote some of the narrative, who provided suggestions and advice and feedback. We're grateful to all of you. And a special thanks to the Irving Harris Foundation and Phyllis Link, who is here, for funding the support of this development of this report and this effort. And a special thanks to Jeffrey Nagel, who is here. He's now at the Harrison Institute, but was a leader in the development of the Louisiana Risk and Reach report. The Louisiana report, some of you may have seen that, was not only an inspiration to us, but also the team has been very generous in their sharing of information, of background, of resources, and we're very grateful. I just want to review the plan for this morning. You have that in your agenda. We'll first hear from Richard Chase, who's going to walk us through the report. He'll highlight some of the methodology, the key findings, some of the limitations of this report, its first step, but also some future directions. And we'll hear from Jeff, who will share some of the experience of implementation of a report like this, and mostly think about why develop a report, what do we do with it, how do we view this and embed this in our policy development. And then we'll hear from all of you, so you'll have a chance to discuss what your ideas, your reactions, comments, and suggestions, and hopefully some dialogue will continue after today so that we can all contribute to the ongoing collective effort. To begin, I want to introduce Phyllis Link. Phyllis is the Executive Director of the Irving Harris Foundation based in Chicago. The foundation and Phyllis have provided national leadership in promoting health and well-being for young children and families. And we're very grateful for their support of our work at the university, and including this report, and for all of their work.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Betty. So good to be here, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words. It's been our privilege to fund the University of Minnesota Betty Center for 20+ years. And we have done that first because Irving Harris comes from St. Paul, so we have deep ties to this community. But also because Minnesota has a very rich history and a lot of incredible leadership and expertise in young children, and particularly in infant mental health and what children and families need to be successful and thrive. So over the years, I've had the opportunity to understand a little bit more about your state and also to get to work with some of you in the room, both on the economic arguments for why you need to invest in young children, but also in the development of incredible research, best practice models, and data in order to inform the way we as a country, but also you as a state, move forward. And I think this report is going to do exactly that for you, and it makes me a little jealous. I co-chair our State Early Learning Council, and while we have data, it's not organized this way. So Jeff is now in Chicago. We need to get on this. But the Irving Harris Foundation focuses on developing the comprehensive services that young children and families need so that children can thrive and be successful. And we focus, of course, on at-risk children, but our emphasis is prenatal to 3 within the prenatal to 5 continuum. And I want to emphasize that the data in this report really does highlight the importance of what research and science is telling us for a long time, that children from the time a mother is pregnant through the first years of life really create that kind of so critical to the importance of children's development, their brain development, their ability to understand the world around them through social and emotional development, understanding how to regulate their behavior, and that it is so critical at times in a child's life that we as a society really need to think about the critical support that needs to be in place. And you've already been starting to do that. I have the opportunity to work with two of your public partners here, Glynis and Catherine Wright, who have worked in mental health and have really been thoughtful about building out various supports through mental health consultation, workforce development, to bring best practice models here around children's mental health and family support. And so I'm very excited to see how this report helps to support what you're already doing, expand it, and to see how others around the country can learn from what you guys are doing here in Minnesota. So thank you for having me. I look forward to your presentation. And I just again want to signal out the leadership that you have here and hope that you all support it and invest in really creating a whole system for children and families. Thank you. I want to introduce Richard Chase. He actually needs no introduction, so most of you know. Richard is the Senior Research Manager here at Wilder. He has produced lots of reports, has a lot of focus on early childhood and school readiness. And he and his team were pulled everything together, all these pieces, all the data, did some magic with them. Anyway, they really pulled everything together and made this report possible. So we're very grateful. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All the materials and reports, you have copies of the summary report on the table. They'll all be sent to you or I'll link to them so you don't have to purchase it. So, and also I want to thank everyone who made this thing possible, Nancy, Marilyn, Ellen, all the Quick Start funders who helped pay for this. So this is the first look at this type of information, comparing early childhood indicators at the county level. You've seen lots of reports that they talk about, usually at the statewide level. In the past, we've been able to make comparisons of the metro counties to the rest of Minnesota. And as you'll see today, all sorts of dichotomous comparisons with rural can be very misleading and mask some of the differences that are important in rural counties. Some recent examples of those reports, one was almost 6 years ago now, the Agency in Minnesota report, Jane Kretzman, with the Project for Babies, put together that report that Jane Mills made. And then almost 4 years ago now, the School Readiness Report Card for the Minnesota Office of Early Learning. Both of those reports, we were able to look at differences by income and race and ethnicity. And in both reports, we found large inequities, disparities in almost all the indicators we're going to look at today by race, whether it's prenatal care, low birth weight, infant mortality, foster care placement. The young children of color, particularly American Indian kids and African American kids, were among the most vulnerable among the young population with those indicators of education, health, and social well-being. So this county by county comparison, we're not able to look at anything by race ethnicity today because there's not information available at that detail by county. But this county report gives us another perspective of how to compare the well-being and the risk of development of young kids. And it's particularly important when in this state, the state sets the rules, funding formulas, provides a lot of the money. The counties administer the programs, And they also have the ability or capacity, if they have the tax base and the economic wherewithal to supplement those services or that provide additional services that aren't provided by the state or mandated by the state or required by the state or available through the state to ensure the well-being of all young kids. So at the county level, we can then, we're hoping that this is a good companion piece to those other reports that do compare at the by race, ethnicity, and income, but provide a look at what the counties might be doing differently. So we have 12 indicators of potential risks to well-being. If you look on page 12 of the report, it lists them there for you. It's living in poverty, lacking adequate prenatal care, lack of immunization, infant mortality, foster care placement, and the like. There's also 8 indicators of how well publicly funded programs are reaching the potentially eligible for those services. So that's some health services like WIC visiting, MPIP, the CAN program in Minnesota, child care assistance, child care subsidies, early Head Start, early screening, early child and special ed, and early intervention. So the kinds of programs that might provide all the basic basic needs safety net as well as access to health services, early education services that would be important for healthy development. What's lacking, even though we can sort of better understand what's happening with regard to these risks at the county level, and really I want to actually, I thought I need to apologize, and I'm really not satisfied that this still is a report about deficits and problems. And primarily because that's the data that are available for most indicators, that our indicators, especially at the county level, are indicators of deficits and problems. And I don't know what's going to happen in my lifetime, but it sure would be nice to have equally powerful information about family strength, community aspects, protective factors to balance out those and overcome those risks. I would love to do a report before I retire on what the assets and services. So what we in the report talks about what we'd like to do next time. There's going to be next time. I think there will be. And part of your discussion later on will be some ideas you might have to add to this report for next time. But one thing for sure we want to do is be able. The initial idea was to actually focus this report on ages 3 and younger. But we found to do this report we had to go up to age 5 and now. So we still want to have a focus on those younger ages. And if you know what I've been writing about lately, is we're focusing on prenatal age 2. Is what I think we need to focus on. It'd be good to have indicators on that. It'd be good to have indicators in addition to family strengths. What's also going on with those family caregivers, like around maternal depression. And what you'll hear about from Jeff would be good to hear in this day too, to add more local data so we can look maybe at some smaller areas in the county, but also look at what money is coming into those counties from the state and from the county itself. Look at the early childhood budgets that help supplement this information. So there's a lot of improvements that we can make, but this is still a really good first start to get the conversation going. So I want to thank also the state agency staff. So to do reports like this, you basically have to talk to the individual program staff that are responsible for their data for that program. Agency by agency, program by program. There still is no good central repository of early childhood data or any data in the state agency. So it's a person by person, and most people are very helpful, so it's going to be here today. Thank you very much. The risk indicators are fairly straightforward. It's just a percentage of children within any particular age group that has whatever that characteristic or lacks. The percentage that got their all their shots at the right time. the percentage that didn't get adequate prenatal care. Those are this percentage. When it comes to the reach calculation, it gets a little more challenging because we have to have the number served, but then we have to divide it by something. And that something could be a little, dynamic or confusing or mysterious. And so we know it's not perfect. We took our best shot. We said, we didn't take the advice of don't report it because you don't know the denominator. We took the sort of stance, we're going to do our best report and say it's not perfect. So that's what we did. It's better to have a close enough approximation. But we know that we don't really have the accurate necessarily denominator. It's very close to what it is because it varies by 100. But for example, for Head Start, you have to have income poverty or below, but it's also other characteristics like it if you're not in poverty. So we don't know how many families have those other characteristics as them in, so we just use the percentage. There's other things like that. All those caveats and explanations are in footnotes of every table. If you're interested in caveats, this report is for you. So then we took each of those. Basically, this is a comparison of each county's data to the state average for both the risk and the reach. And either they're above average or below average in by gradation. And based upon that, they got placed into one of 4 categories. So it looks like this in your report. So if 17% of kids under age 6 in Minnesota live in poverty, if it's on the county map, if it's dark blue, that means that they're above that average. So the standard deviation or more above. And you'll see in parentheses just what that percentage in poverty is. So for high risk, that means that county has greater than 25%. If they're low risk, they're below the state average, they're less than 10%. So we're basically, it's a relative counties relative to each other, relative to the state average. In some counties that have no data, some of those maps then have no color and no range, and so that's plain. The same thing with the reach. So we know that 35% of children age 3 receive early childhood screening. So higher reach, higher proportion of counties that did that, greater than 56%. If it's lower than that, low reach is less than 28%. That's based upon state average deviation from that average. Clear? You want to dig into more details? Peter? Ellen? Are you here, Ellen? Ellen, Peter's in the front, Ellen's in the back. They work really close together, but they didn't fit very close. They did all the heavy lifting. You want more details on Z-scores and all the rest? Then what we're able to do is create a composite risk, sort of global risk, a total risk score for the county by taking all those standard deviation scores, the Z-scores, adding them up and doing it one more time, looking how many are above or below that average, and then putting them into one of those categories. And that's what we're able then to use that as the base map, which we can look at, to apply the reach to see what is the reach of the program relative to the overall risk status of the county relative to the other counties. So we usually, I think we'd like to have low risk and high reach. At this stage of the game, I think we want to have as high a reach as we can because we don't really have a lot of really good, stable, developmental status for a lot of young kids in Minnesota. Eventually, we want to balance out the risk of reach. We have no information to do that. All right, so let's look at this overall risk, composite risk, based upon the average curve. So we're interested in here in where counties fall along that continuum of risk. And to think about which counties are doing well and which ones that have the greatest need, and what can we learn from counties with the lowest risk environment to get we can help maybe apply to the higher risk one. So we got about 436,000 kids aged 5 and younger living in 87 counties. There's about 80,000 in these 12 counties that are considered in the best and the low risk counties. There's counties that you probably would imagine, that you know about in the metro. The richer counties in the metro, Carver, Scott, Washington. It's also includes outside the metro, Sherburne and Wright, and then Red Lake County. We're going to add in the low to moderate risk. 37 of those with about 155,000. So, you see your county up there. In the moderate to high risk, about 132,000 kids living in these 19 counties. And here we add in Hennepin County, the moderate to high risk county. And last are the counties that come out as having the most developmental risk. Kids in Minnesota, the counties that became the subject of the reporter in today's search. Okay. So there's about 68,000 children who are at great. Not saying that every child in this county is at risk developmentally, so there's a higher probability of being at risk. Did I see me wrong? Is it clear now or something? Can't touch any. There's more wires up here than there is room in my hand. Usually about this, it's really not set up for talking. It's set up for in the machine with wires. So let's talk about these guys that come. 8 of them, of the 15, they have high proportions of kids living in poverty, and 6 of those have high proportions of American Indians. And the counties with the most indicators at high risk are the northern counties of Monoman, Becker, Beltrami, and Cass. Each of these counties have, just think of this, but of kids age 5 and younger, 20 to more than 50% of those kids are American Indians. Very high proportion of Indians that are living in high risk counties. And then what's surprising for us, for me, I guess I should have known this, but I didn't think of it. What pops up now is Ramsey County as being a high-risk county comparable to those other high-risk counties in Minnesota. And why is that? Because they are the poorest metro county, and they're the most racially diverse metro county. In many ways, they're more similar to those greater Minnesota counties that we've been masking for all these years in the other metro counties. So, I learned really 2 things. One was the Ramsey County part. The other part was that even though we cannot look at these data by race ethnicity as we have in the past, it's still unavoidable to see the sort of unacceptable disparities. They still stand out on this map where all the American Indians. You can't hide those disparities when you have to do something. Face up to that. Just looks at, it's a dangerous slide to look at because almost every single one of these programs has a different eligibility sort of requirement. In fact, the only 2 that actually have the same, but not exactly the same. Actually, there's no 2 that have the same eligibility, none. So imagine trying to figure out who qualifies. Each one of these has 185% poverty plus something else, or 180 plus something else, not that, or all kids, or 125%, or it's just poverty, or 200% of poverty. But given that, you can see there's a range of reach for the publicly funded programs, from with reaching a high proportion of 70%. Now, early intervention, early special ed, that's a little misleading because that's, I guess all kids could be eligible for that potentially, but they're not. We estimate that roughly 15 to 17% have the sorts of needs that would be served by that. So if we looked at that as a qualifier, they would be comparable to early Head Start reaching about 25%, which is probably 6-7%. Let's just take a closer look at 3 of these services. So 35% of children age 3 receive early childhood screening. So this maps the reach of the screening to the risk of the county. So we would think that dark blue, the high-risk counties, we hope they have a higher reach of screening to try to get those kids early enough, get them into services before developmental problems or rise rate was. The metro area, about a quarter, pretty low reach in Anthony and Ramsey County. The reach ranges from 80% in Monoman to as high as 75% in places like Douglas and Pipestone and Wacoparo. So for those of you who know about what's going on in those counties, the importance of the word, how can you reach 75%? Not 8%. Because this week. Head Start. Early Head Start. There's about a quarter of kids who are living in poverty under 86. In general, greater level of reach in metro and outside the metro than inside the metro. Pretty high reach in those counties with high risk up in Minnesota. But again, the range is huge. So 10% in places like Benton and Murray and Rock and Sherburne, as high as 80%. Places like Clearwater or Lincoln or Swift. So why do we have these huge disparities in reach for Head Start and early Head Start? And finally, family home visiting. This is just the survey, this is just the Canada funded home visiting. So families 185% in poverty and below. So it's local public health and the tribes that use the $8 million Canada money on the state casino and county. So again, higher reach counties for that program tend to be greater than so. Metro counties, I think, have additional funding from county government for the local public health, for not just public health home visiting, but family educators. There's a lot to dig into. If I went over each map, for each indicator was here for 3.5 hours, and we didn't want to do that. So I'm going to start drawing conclusions. So we hope that we might have been more than the data and this fancy map, but we actually put this to use to recognize how some counties can be do better. What policy decisions are made at the state and county level that might affect the reach of services? How can the state adjust rules, funding formula to achieve equity across these counties instead of having these huge disparities and reach from 10 to 80% in some cases? What can the counties do to supplement that funding? Now, I said in the morning paper, I'm not in the article about us, that I wasn't going to, we shouldn't be pointing any fingers, so I'm not going to point any fingers, but it's incredibly propitious and ironic that in today's Tribune, on the front page, Art's not here. Art, are you here? Art, on the front page, another failure of yours here. Ramsey County backs tax-free land for a soccer stadium. So the county with the highest and greatest risk, I'm just saying, the county with 28% of kids in poverty, highest is part of the highest risk, where they need the most tax space they can have, tax-free land for soccer on page 1, and then all about why Ramsey County stands out in the highest risk on page 2. If the county commissioners can read the code, if the Ramsey County commissioners read the Minneapolis paper, I hope they see the irony in my tweet. But, so how can we put this to use for the county to actually use this information, for good purpose? And then, here's my plug for the state people who are working on the longitudinal data system, Little Childhood longitudinal data system. Like I said, right now you have to collect this data program by program, person by person. That's just a logistical problem. What the real problem is analytical in terms of policy. So we don't know how many kids have how many of the risk factors. We only know the proportion of each risk factor. We cannot match reach to the risk. We don't know what's going together. If we have a viable system that at the child level, we'd be able to answer questions over time of how risk accumulates and how reach might do something about that risk. And one more plug, as long as I have the microphone. So that we have it's going to come out pretty soon. It's a very well-designed, good working system as far as it goes in terms of the data indicators in the current early childhood longitudinal data system paid for with rates at the top of it. But it does not include information on screening. It does not include information on Head Start. There's nothing there about Minnesota healthcare programs. Missing a lot of good, let alone the resiliency and protective factors that they're really on. So it's an incomplete system. That's why we have to advocate for phase 2. Remember that. Phase 2 of the longitudinal data. Okay. As the demographic picture of Minnesota, the way it looks now with the populations at greatest risk are the populations that are growing in the state. We have to wake up to that. We have to address income inequality, racial inequity. We have to make sure that the regional programs are targeted to reach those in most need. And we have to broaden our understanding of what healthy child development is. More than just focusing on that child. That's important. But we have to build the capacity and increase the strength of their families and their communities. If we really want to not have a whole state begin to look like those high-risk states, including Ramsey. So, thank you very much. Before I introduce Jeff, I think we have time for questions. Oh, there's time for 2 concrete questions. How much time do we have? 10 minutes. Carol Miller, in the back.
Good morning. Thank you. First, I want to say on behalf of many of us who do this work, thank you to all of you who participated. The researchers in the county and the county staff and the state staff that are making this work. My question to you guys is, how do you come out at different risk levels, especially the combined ones? Are there situations like I believe maybe the case in Madison County where there are pockets of more extreme risk, geographically, that get masked by being surrounded by more affluence?
Right. Exactly. That's why. So we've been masking Ramsey County by looking at metro. So yeah, we mask. That's why we want the next report. It'd be great to have it within the county and more localized information. So we just even at the neighborhood level in Hennepin County to be able to pinpoint where they might be. Because I for one think that just focusing on 2 promised neighborhoods is great for those neighborhoods. Well, what about kids just living outside those neighborhoods? We're pitting neighborhoods against kids, disadvantaging some by helping others. We shouldn't be doing that. So yeah, the more we have localized information, the better. I agree. Yes.
Again, thank you very much. This is fantastic. But one of the things, and one of the areas. One of the areas I wonder if you might include or have looked at is how the services and listening to are correlated or correlate with the information that you found.
Yeah. The more the merrier. Yeah, we did not include that. We did focus though on services directed towards kids and families, so transportation, housing, a little bit more. We could map, given the methods we have now, we can map all sorts of indicators from our compass database onto that risk map to look at what's going on. So yeah, that's possible. Write that down for our ideas for next. Yeah, look, hi.
I'm Tom Scott, I'm a pediatrician. I teach at the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much for this comprehensive report. My question has to do with the early childhood screening measure. And I think the report looks at 70 different types of early childhood screening. I'm wondering if, by definition, does the screening count for the purpose of the report? Is it one type of screening or all 7 types?
This is the screen that's the Department of Education is responsible for documenting and reporting. So it does not. So it wouldn't include other sorts of screening. This has been an issue for people trying to accumulate screening information across different systems for a long time. So if they went to their pediatrician and got screened, everything was fine. That wouldn't be included unless that somehow got reported to their local school district. It's an MPE data, state education reported data. Yes.
Hi, Richard. You might have said this before, and I missed it, but how did you account, or did you account for small populations? Did you look at multiple years of data in terms of the risk and the...
Yeah, it's all, I don't have it memorized, believe me, but in each indicator indicates which years it's for. So, for example, population data was over a period of years from the American Community Survey, so to get an estimate, it's over, I don't know, let's see, 5 years? Yeah. 5 years. Yeah. But it varies. Everything, there's, what's, you have to be careful about the report. Every indicator is different with regard to the range, how it fits into that risk category, and, which data are used. So look carefully for this.
Just quickly looking at the risk indicators, I'm wondering how you chose those. In other words, if we're looking at success in life as the final determinant of risk, these seem to be very highly influenced by health risks, and yet there's quite a few risks, whether you use Robert Anda's ones or you can pick any of the different analysis of risk factors. It seems like quite a few that are recognized nationally are not in here, and it's very heavy on health, and I just wondered if that really balances out right. Success in life.
Right. We started with a very long list, and what it came down to was what we could agree upon in the committee, but also what was available at the county level for the most states. So a lot of that information you're talking about is just not available at a county level. So because this is a county level report, that became a chief sort of selection criteria. Those other indicators are probably in our basic report or the school readiness report, if they're not in the school. That is one of the limitations. It's not all of it. Once we get information, but they're important. They're all research based. They all contribute to something that might enhance healthy development or support it if you have it. But there's some education we can feel around that start.
And maybe could be developed.
Yeah, definitely. We want to keep it. And if there's an uproar for having information, it will be start collected. Some of the information is collected at the county level, but not reported in the way we can actually to the state, so we can actually get it. So we have to do county. Imagine going 87 counties for each one of the folks as one staff person in the state. So it's a daunting. Time up. All right. Thank you very much. important. There's no coffee and food available in the other room. When you take a break, welcome back to work. Jeff has been, you probably have seen him around. He's been to Minnesota many times over the past several years to advocate for systems to better understand, especially around mental health for kids. He was at Tulane when he worked with the state of Louisiana to do their initial report, which became sort of the impetus to get this one in Minnesota. He's currently the head of the Erickson Institute in Chicago. His bio is on the back of the program. And, yep.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good news, I just saw someone turning down the air conditioning, so we'll stop freezing in a moment. It's certainly wonderful to be with you today. Been talking to a lot of you for the past couple of years about this report, and so it's wonderful that you all made it happen. As far as I know now, only Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and Minnesota have a report like this, and was maybe the best. Yeah, so everyone, you know, in Louisiana, we learned from Pennsylvania, and I hope that we're able to take some of our lessons learned in Louisiana and help Richard and his team here at Hopefully that has happened as I read the report. So hopefully it's going to be a very useful tool for you. I think it will be, and now your fun begins that you have all the information. So congratulations to Richard and his team and her team for making this happen. You should all feel very proud and fortunate to have that here. What I want to do just with my little time with you is just kind of put the report into a larger context, because I think we have to think about why and what do we do with the support, why do we have it, how do we really utilize it. And so what I'm basically here to talk about is how to put this into a larger perspective. And I'm calling the public health approach to supporting early childhood experience. So, you know, I call this moving the needle, and kind of thing on the needle is a very dangerous thing. So I wanted to change the title to Shifting the Curve. It was already printed out on your slide here. We'll get to that message later on. And then what I also want to say is I'm going to ask a lot of questions during this little presentation, so get in the code. I know this is the way to keep adults engaged. It's hard to pay attention for more than 15 minutes or 10 minutes. So get ready, and Richard and Peter and Ellen are going to start tracking their next report, which is who in the room can answer these trivia questions. So if we go back in time to our good friends, Marty and Doc, and here's question number one. What year did this movie come out? I heard someone say 1985. Someone said 1981, not that long ago. Oh my God, it's been 30 years since this movie came out. But I often think about this when I think about what's going on in early childhood, because I kind of feel like we're going back to the future. I never know if we're really making progress or right where we were, unfortunately, 30 or almost 50 years ago. So if I go back just half that time, 2000, just 15 short years ago, and refresh our memory of where we were in the early childhood field. But of course, anything with the year 2000 starts with the dreaded apocalypse of Y2K, and how the country was going to end. You know, we finally embraced our computers, and now they were going to turn off the lights and the phone or landline phone. Nothing was going to work ever again. So we overcame that and started to learn about new things that never existed at that time. None of these existed back in 2000. The cloud was still just those things in the sky that bring our weather, and Twitter was just a good old pound of tweets, and there was no Facebook or LinkedIn. Apps were still something we sent into colleges or something. And all of that has changed. And about that time, we started seeing images of the brain coming out in the popular press. Time and Newsweek started showing that, wow, the brains of really young children can look quite different depending on their experience. And then there was this really seminal report from the Institute of Medicine, from Neurons to Neighborhoods, which is still a really great read if you really like thick books about science. But it really does do a great job of providing the foundation of what is driving, I believe, the early childhood conversations today. But we used very different language back then. We talked about, rightfully so, the importance of the early years, and not to miss the opportunities of shaping that developing brain, certainly the moral argument of the right thing to do. And we talked about brain development, as we were seeing from the scans, and that really kind of brought that into the popular conversation of the day. But as we move forward to 2015 and moving forward, we talk about those things, but we do talk about them in a very different way, right? We don't just talk about brain development, we talk about brain architecture, we talk about cognitive stress, we talk about disparities, we talk about the economic development impact, and as we say that Art is here today, Art, are you here? Hey, Art, good to see you, big part of driving that conversation. Obviously, the national security conversation and, you know, the small percentage of people who are eligible to enlist in our armed services, and one of the retired military leaders saying that all traces back to early childhood. And now in the most recent years, talking about things like executive function, and STEM, the impact of trauma, and of course the opportunities that we have with nurturing grit, and then just the impact really based on epigenetics. So it's all kind of rooted in the same conversation, but our vocabulary and nomenclature has changed a great deal. And so I really see us at this crossroads, right? But unfortunately, I feel like we've been standing at this crossroads since 1971, so way back beyond 1985. Because in 1971, some great senator from the state of Minnesota helped pass the Early Childhood Development Act, which was to provide universal preschool for all, really like an entitlement program in the country. And it passed with bipartisan support, big margins in Congress, but unfortunately was vetoed by President Nixon, and that was really the start of the debate of government raising the family and the children and all this stuff that we have to still contend with today. So the question really is, here in 2015, which path are we going now? Where are we going? And so are we going back to the future, or are we moving ahead? And I would maintain that if we want to choose the path that's going to get us moving forward, we really need a paradigm shift in the way we advocate and talk about these issues. And I think the report is one piece in getting us down that path. So part of this is to think about the importance of early experience, right? So I use that word early experience in my cover slide there, because oftentimes when we talk about early childhood, we get caught up in talking about early childhood education or early learning, and we may use those terms interchangeably as if they're synonymous. But the reality is early education, early learning is a component of early experience. But early experience is much bigger. It's a much broader, much more comprehensive. And again, I think the report drives us to think more comprehensively, because it's not just focused on educational measures, and that's a great opportunity. So when we think about the future and how we are going to really start walking down a different path, it's not just choosing the path, but it's knowing how to take that first step. And so what I'd say, how do we take that first step to move the needle or shift the curve? And so this new paradigm that I say we have to intentionally, because we do this in some ways, we just don't do it intentionally. Sometimes I think we don't even know if and when we're doing it. But we need to be thinking about this in terms of transforming population outcomes, right? It's not just helping those kids or these kids with X, Y, or Z risk factor or from A, B, or C background. It's really about, we want to shift the curve for all children out there. And the toughest list, of course, is the ones that are at most risk. So this is a very public health approach to addressing the problem, much more comprehensive, much more in line with thinking about the comprehensive needs of children as they develop. So it's really the difference between population view versus individual view, and I'll try to bring that to light. And for the most part, you're really thinking on the front end, much more prevention focused and just addressing problems after they arrive. So when we think about public health and what does that really mean, and if I ask you all in here to find public health, I get a lot of different definitions, and I was thinking about doing that, but all sorts of crazy answers. And I was thinking about, I can remember the first time I even heard the word public health. And I don't know if you can kind of think back to that moment, like, well, what is public health? And someone said, oh, you should go into public health. Well, I was working in a bar in Ecuador in 1994, and someone said the word public health to me, and I literally had never heard those words before. And little did I know that that conversation was going to lead me to live in Minnesota 21 years later talking about public health. But what does public health really mean? But first off, we want to think about assessment, and that's what you have in the REACH portion of the REACH and risk report. what is really going on out there for whatever the issue is you're trying to understand. In this case, it's risk, as opposed to what often public health is looking at, which is disease or some sort of infection or something. So you have this component well covered here, and obviously some of the questions there's a lot more you can put in there, but you're off to a phenomenal start. Then there's policy development, which you would hope that policy development is informed by data that comes through the assessment, and there are lots of great examples of that happening, and we can talk about that for a moment. And then there's the assurance. Do people get the needed whatever the policy is trying to get? And I think that's what we all try and do, but we struggle with because of the lack of funding, the lack, if you're trying to build a quality rating system or something, is there enough quality to assure that people get to it? So these are all components of what we do every day, although again, we may not think about it in this frame. But just to make it really concrete, let's think about large public health interventions. Food labels, something that many of us probably look at every day when we're in the market, and looking at what probably is somewhat confusing food labels, but we do have certain information that we all glean from these things. But of course, they didn't always exist, and they started existing because we had various health epidemics going on in this country that people would trace back to diet, and said we have to change this, and one way to do that is through providing information to people, all people, not just some people, not just people with various health-related problems from diet, but this was for all people, and is obviously now widely accepted, and I hope utilized. Certainly, the kind of principal thing that people think about in terms of public health are vaccinations. Again, we struggle with getting that up to the percentage we want, but we know that that is available for all kids, and then we really have to make sure that it happens for all kids. But that was not always around, and of course now we don't often think about polio as an issue, and of course that was a major public health crisis in its day. Even the Environmental Protection Agency, whatever your political persuasions are and what you think about it, it is a public health intervention to address, the quality of our air and water and land. And obviously impacts all people. Something we do every day is obviously deal with our cars, especially having to put our seatbelt on. We're really being a part of public health intervention. You think about the space around motorcycle helmets, car safety seats, big public health intervention, and obviously trying to address drinking and driving. So here's the question. When did seatbelts become required in automobiles? I hear 75, but I only hear one guess. Come on.
It's all into.
Oh, it's 1968. 68 required in cars. I don't know if those are
Not required. In the car, but not to work.
Not to wear. Not to wear. Required. Wait, so it's only required in the car. I remember these seatbelts that like cupped up into something and you took it down and never get it up again. So no one used them. And the first state to require use of a seatbelt, what state and what year? Not Minnesota. No, not Iowa or not Kansas. It was New York. New York State in 1984. Wow, we really stumped everyone in here. 1984. So New York 1984 after they were required and cars in 1968. Now tobacco, we all kind of go, oh yeah, that is the big public health intervention, of course. And it wasn't just the Surgeon General's report in 1964 that started changing the conversation, but it was really the assessment component of the public health, right? They started really trying to identify who becomes the smokers, when do they become addicted, all of that, and then you started isolating what you had to do with policy based on that assessment data. Well, it was young people, and the more you could delay that first use of cigarettes, the better chance you had that person would not become a lifetime smoker. Right? So that really then informed the next component of public health, which was policy. So these are really clear examples of how public health is a daily part of our lives, and we're influenced by them every day, but we may not often think about that as, oh yeah, that's a public health situation. One more, fluoride, something that most of us are probably exposed to in our kids. Of course, this is an ongoing debate, whether we fluoridate our water or not, but we've seen dramatic improvements in terms of tooth decay getting tooth loss in our population. So all of these are examples of public interventions, not at any specific population, but designed to address the problem for all people. So, again, this is why I was thinking, oh, I should have been shifting the curve. I worked really hard on the slide to shift the curve, and we'll see, because if this is kind of what goes on in a normal distribution of a population, what we're really talking about in terms of addressing early childhood experience is shifting the curve, right? We want more kids doing better. We don't want just average, and we certainly spend a lot of our time right down there at the short end of the curve here. So we want to flatten that end of the curve. We want to shift kids to the right for better outcomes, all kids, and we want to narrow that distribution in the middle, right? Because that's the disparity issue right there. We want to make sure all of our kids are doing really well, not just in some sort of range of quote-unquote normal. We want that range to be much further to the right. So that's really what I think a lot of us are trying to address, and that's what this report is a big part of doing. Now, one of the ways we often are really in a public health space but don't think about it that way, and we certainly don't use that word, or those words, is when we're systems building, right? So I've often thought of myself as really being focused on early childhood systems, and I have a public health background, but I often neglected to use those words. But I think systems building is our way of really addressing public health by different names. I'll give you the example of that. So what is the best way to address state policy? I would say it's through the budget. State budget drives the policy conversation. And so this is the component of the REACH report is the assessment component of public health. The risk component of the risk and REACH report is the assurance, where you're trying to figure out who's getting those services. So the policy part of the conversation then is the budget. And that's then the next piece of information. You talk about a phase 2 of the report. Maybe a phase 3 or a phase 1A might be getting a handle on what's going on the dollars that then produce those maps that Richard just showed you. So one of the ways to think about this, again, is that we have to come to understand that when we advocate for policy, that on a state level, the budget is the most significant policy document. It is the final column of public policy making. So what do we know about the state budget, and how overwhelmed are we when we think about what's in there and how do we get that information? And then the second is, if we do cross-system planning, how do we do that without a cross-system budget? Right? So if we're trying to build a system, we're not thinking about the budget or have that front and center, we're really going to be limited in what we can do. So this is an example of something that we were able to create in conjunction with the risk and REACH report. The details up here are not important. I'm going to show you the highlights. Don't bother squinting or saying what's up there. But what we did conceptually here is we built an early childhood budget and had it passed in law, so this is created year in and year out, is that instead of organizing the state budget, I mean, the state budget is the state budget, and that's organized by the State Department. But we created an additional document from the state budget called the Early Childhood Budget that was organized by the big issues we were trying to impact in early childhood. Their physical health, their mental health, their family support / parenting education, and early care and education. So if you forget the department, just think about how do we address those 4 areas, that's what produced this report. So this is just one page. These would be the mental health services the state provides for young kids under 5, regardless of what department they're in. So what the report provides, and so I'll circle pieces, it tells you who the lead agency is and the contact person. So again, whether it's in your Department of Health or your Department of Social Services or whatever you would call it in your state, it would tell you who's doing it, what the name of the program is, just a couple sentence description of what it is, the population served, the funding sources, federal, state, and what type of federal and state sources, and what counties they're provided in. So you get a quick snapshot of what is the program, who does it serve, where does it provide the services, and who do I contact if I want more information. And then it breaks down the sources of the funding, from your state general funds to any interagency transfers between departments, any fees that are charged to the parents, if there's a statutory dedication, any of the federal dollars, any both. So in one place, whether you're an advocate, whether you work in state government, whether you're a legislator, you can go and get all the information organized for you by these topical areas for young children. What you really get is this is a summary page here. So behind it, 15 or 20 pages of program-specific information. And what it wraps up to is that you would see, these are real numbers from a few years ago in Louisiana, that the state for young children specifically spent almost $1 billion in terms of health, $283 million for early care and education, almost that amount for parenting, education, and family support, mental health much lower, and then the total. So the total about $1.4 billion. So now you have all this information, and I think what's critical is not just that you have it for 1 year, although that's a lot more information than we had at any one time, but then of course you can do it year in and year out, so you have the trend data, and you can see what's really going on. And again, certain numbers just pop off the page at you, and obviously the big message here is that we spent practically nothing for mental health purposes, which was an important message at that time 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll mention that a little more in a moment. But then again, when you're looking from year to year, so regardless of what years these are, but these were real data at one point, and you would say, oh wow, we have $50 million more going for young children in this given year compared to last year. Where did that come from? Wow, it's mainly state dollars that are being invested, and those state dollars are mainly in the medical side of the equation. Say, well, how did that happen? Well, it wasn't a new program, and it wasn't a new affection for young children in the state budget. It had to do with the state Medicaid rate matching, Medicaid rate changing. So how much the state had to put into the same federal dollars changed, and so that's what infused those dollars. And then other numbers. So you would see the big changes, and then you could go into the document to really see what changed from 1 year to the next. So overall, I mean, even a simple chart like this was amazing at how much information is provided to people who don't work inside of state government every day. And frankly, we had people inside of state government saying, wow, I've just never even seen a pie chart like that. It's basic, simple information. How much of the state budget overall, this isn't just for young children, overall, over half of it is state dollars. Maybe that isn't known. But then of the dollars that go to young children, what percent of our state dollars are spent on young children? Well, in FY12 in Louisiana, that was only under 3% of the dollars. About 9% of the federal dollars that came into the state were spent for young children. So of the entire $25 billion state budget, at the time about 5.5% was spent on young children. Well, that is a different way of slicing and dicing it, to advocate or argue or fight for more resources for children, but with no reference point of the first question a legislator is going to ask you is, how does that compare to other states? Well, that's tough because this information doesn't exist for many states or any other state. But again, what's really important is that you have the information and you look at it over time, because if we look at what happened over the next few years, you see these numbers continue to go down. So that 3 years later, we're down to 4% of the state budget, federal and state dollars, being spent for young children. Only 2% of the state dollars actually going for the state children. Now, if you back Medicaid out of that, because Medicaid is a huge piece of the total, you really say, so you're reducing the numerator and the denominator. What dollars does the state send towards the youngest children if you remove Medicaid? And it's like 1% of their own money that they're putting into their children. So it gives everybody a lot of information to inform the conversation in a way that we often found, and I still see in the states that I go to, people don't have this at the ready, and they really talk about how important these issues are. So ultimately, if you looked at those areas, how we organize the early childhood budget, again, what really jumped off this page was 1% going to mental health. And this, again, it changed the conversation from what is early childhood mental health to, oh my God, we're spending nothing on early childhood mental health. You completely jump over the debate, is something that should be implemented? Clearly, we're not doing enough in that area. And then again, you get the trend data, I think, is the most impressive, because you see that the total state budget for young children has decreased over 27%, and even the very popular movement in early childhood education has dropped about 15%. So oftentimes, telling a different story than what the perception was. Which again leads us back to the opportunity with this report. So what they're trying to do in Louisiana now, and what I would throw out as a suggestion here is, You want to try to get budget information around those programs that you have in support, so that part of the report can show what's happening with the dollars year in and year out in any of those issues. If you want those maps to change, you have to understand how the budget is flowing in the state as well. So to me, the ideal report is this great information you have today, plus the budget information, all in one place. Because then all of us, again, whether you're inside of government or outside of government, we all need this information to have the conversations we need to have around policy to make the best decisions for whatever the resources we have. We have to use that to the maximum to really have the greatest impact. Because ultimately, the whole hypothesis I'm putting forth here is that if we want to really impact early childhood policy, we need to do this in a different frame, because if we do that, we will lead to increased investment and innovation. We'll be smarter with this type of information, which then will produce the kind of outcomes we're all coming here this morning to hear about. We want to see those changes for our kids. We don't want those little incremental changes. We don't want those little, oh yay, that program helps those 100 kids. We need to see the shift and curve for all of our children. So with that, I think we turn over to questions now. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Just want to thank you for the great policy slides. I appreciate the macro thinking and framing and messaging that flows from that. What reflections do you have from the states you work in about what is the real gap in early childhood funding or early learning funding, however you want to work with that? Because you took us to a pie chart, but it didn't say kind of how underfunded that sector might be and how it might compare with the number of kids in need. So just run with that for a little bit and give us a sense of scope and scale. Because going to mental health funding is kind of one aha takeaway, but I think it's in the context of the fact you're probably underfunded by 50 or 75%.
Right, so, okay, so the real macro way I would run with that question. So in 2000, Great Britain said they were going to eliminate child poverty. And to do that, they were going to spend, on top of whatever they were already spending for children, they were going to spend 1% of their GDP toward those efforts. And 5 or 10 years in, they weren't at their 50% mark of reduction at that point, but they had taken a big bite out of child poverty at a percent that we would love to achieve in this country. Just to put that in perspective, if we spent an additional 1% of GDP in this country on children, so hopefully young children, so what is our GDP? Was it 1.7 trillion or something like that? 17 trillion? So 1% around 170 billion, right? So we have these fights going on today in Congress about funding universal pre-K, 70, 80, 100 billion over 10 years, so let's put in 10 billion a year, and that's not going to happen. We're arguing over 10 billion instead of just 170 billion that we should really be having a conversation about a lot more. I say that just to put it in perspective that I think the conversations we have that we think are going to be, wow, that would be such a big step, aren't really going to move the needle the way we want to see it. One of the big challenges we have is we don't know what that number is, right? So we can't put up here what should the pie chart look like, ideally, to know we're going to have the best outcomes for kids. I'm just saying, at least now we know what we're spending on the kids, and then we can all get in rooms like this and have a conversation about how should the money be spent. The medical slice of the pie is always going to be the highest because we do have Medicaid, and medical care costs a lot of money, and when states are paying 50 or 60% of all birth in the state, you're always going to have a big chunk when you're talking about young children. But we can have a conversation about what should those other slices of the pie look like. And clearly, if we put up your slice of the pie for mental health in the state, I'd be willing to bet it's not going to be much more than the 1%. Maybe you won't even get to the 1%. Well, we should all know that, so we can understand. What are the needs of the kids that we need to address? Based on what information a report like this, what are we spending? How does that compare just within our state? Remember, your risk and reach report is a comparison of the risk of your kids compared to other kids in the state only, right? It's not even to what ideal child in the world, it wouldn't be in the country, but in the world. So we often don't even know what that ideal benchmark is compared to what level of risk for what kid. How much money should we spend? We don't know that. But I don't think we would get any argument that we're not spending enough money for our young children to produce the outcomes that we need for our kids. But no one can get up here and tell you what those dollars are. Not even our government can tell you what the amount of money is. So we should absolutely be spending for our young kids.
Good to have you back here, Jerry. But I want to question your analogy of public health. Let me give you an example from Minnesota. On the White Earth Reservation, over half the children are born addicted. That's a health issue. It's not a public health issue. When you think of public health, when I think of public health, I think of full portfolio, polio, and polio affects all of us, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. But it's clear in this state, and I'd say in this country, we have an achievement gap. In fact, we have one of the largest achievement gaps in the country. And that if you're born into poverty, you're very likely to end up in poverty. So a public health approach leads you, as you're suggesting, to universal. And I'm going to argue that with limited resources, even though we have a $7 trillion in every state, in every city, we have very limited resources, and we have to figure out the best way to invest those dollars. And so while I agree with you on a health approach to it, I think it's critical we define the problem clearly. The problem is not a health, it's a health problem, but it's a problem with poverty. And if you're born into poverty, you're less likely to be healthy, you're more likely to start school well behind, and you're more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. So with limited dollars, we're having this debate in this state as we speak between universal and target. From an economist's point of view, there is no question the best public investment we can make is investing in high quality early childhood development, starting as early as prenatal. We know if we can get to the mom second, third month, the child's more likely to be born full weight, full term. That is by far the best public investment. If you have more dollars, you can increase the funding. Here we do scholarships. We can make scholarships available to families with higher incomes over time. But the first dollars fully invest in our most at-risk children. I think this report kind of makes it clear in a lot of ways we're failing. So, from question, obviously, your use of public health. My wife's an epidemiologist. She clearly tells me regularly that this is a health issue. But again, I question when you think of it as a public health issue, I'm afraid you're going to go down a route in which many of our children are already in a doing well. We're going to be subsidizing and funding programs that the return is very low. In fact, a recent study out of Norway shows that the benefits for middle class kids were less than costs. But for low-income kids, huge benefit cost ratio. So, I push you on it just to think of it more as a health issue rather than a public health.
Right. So what I'm arguing is that our problem is, and the reason why we're still standing at the same point we were in 1971 is because we do think of it in that frame as a health issue, or a smaller subset. And that's why we can't make the big shift that we need to. And that when you really see huge change, it's got to be in the public health framing for all people. That it's, to me, a losing argument, and one that we're always going to be saying, there's just not enough dollars, there's just not enough resources. That is the reality we live in today, that is the world we live in. It's what creates the challenges for all of us. But when is that going to change? How is that going to change? Unless we change the way we approach this whole thing. Otherwise, we come back here in 30 years, and whoever is still working in the state, we're going to have some kind of similar conversation, I'm afraid. And until we make it about all the kids. And as Art said, it may be 50% of that or some subgroup, But all those examples I showed you, not every kid needs the fluoride because some came from families who get their children fluoride defense anyway. They would have paid for that. Not everybody needed to be mandated to wear seatbelts, but some people wear seatbelts. Not everyone needs to be told to use a child safety seat because some people will do that. But when we really start getting the child safety seat is for everyone, and you would never consider not using something like that, is when it changes the public consciousness of what this is. So I'm saying this old way of doing it isn't working for us to get the outcomes for the kids. We have too many of today's struggles that are the same struggles we had 30 years ago. What's going to change? We have to think of it differently. And the only reason I think Art is standing up there arguing the other side is because he's a realist and knows there's not enough money. So that immediately puts us in a box. And so I would say for the 50% of the children that are being born to substance abusing parents, and that's a specific subset of the population, and that's going to be a huge struggle. The way to attack that struggle is in a broader public health frame, so it's not just about those people. That, I think, is what keeps us just running in the same place.
Hi, Phyllis. On that comment, I guess I would argue that I agree with you on the universal approach, but I don't think that it has to mean that you start by giving money to the most wealthy either. You can scale up programs within a universal context, so you get more broad-based support, that you might scale up the intervention starting with the most at risk, so you do with better outcomes, and it's more cost-effective with limited resources. We've done that with our universal preschool for all, which I explained last night. For every dollar we spend on 3 and 4-year-olds in our state, we set aside a percentage for infants and toddlers. And so the preschool program is universal, although 10 years later it's still not scaled up to a universal program because there isn't enough funding, but as it increases, so does the reach. But the first of 3 set aside is for at-risk children because it's more limited. And that's the way we sort of struggled with this issue just on a small scale around preschool. 2 comments about and questions about the public health approach and the budget. Some conversation on advocates in Illinois is that when you put all the money in one place, federal and state, that goes to young children, it could look fairly significant, even though in the way it's distributed through health and other things it isn't, and therefore could potentially put a target on the back of this funding. We're seeing that now with child care in our state that's been decimated because it's a big number, even though it was reaching only a small percentage of the kids at risk. So if you can address that and how you think about that from an advocacy and policy frame, and also whether or not putting together this risk and reach kind of report in Louisiana and the budget led to any better integration across child and family serving systems so that resources are used more efficiently and effectively to reach the needs of children and families, or do you still see the sort of siloed approach where multiple programs are serving sometimes the same kids without a lot of coordination?
Right. Okay, let me answer the second part while I try to remember what the first part was. But
I'll remind you.
What?
I'll remind you.
Okay. So, yes, I cannot say that we have seen dramatic changes in Louisiana with all that information. And that's part of the thinking, that put the whole report together, to put it in one place for people. But what we have seen, and what I've heard is already starting to happen here, is that this type of information has brought people together who have been working for too long in isolation. So when we tried to get this data in Louisiana, we would have people say, well, you know, it's no problem to give you the data, but I already know what the map's going to look like. Except when we showed them the map, they were like, oh my gosh, I never looked at it like that, because they were looking at things regionally and not by county, and then they want to go to the next level. So within the county, what does it look like in smaller subsets? So people felt very empowered by the information and felt like, oh, okay, so now I can see how I can't get more money for this, but I can go over there and work with this person who's doing this program, and they have that reach based on the reach map. And so it has facilitated a lot more conversation and connection between the different pieces of state government that I think all want to work together, but because of the demands of the day and demands of the funding streams often, get pushed into their silos. So it creates a more connected conversation. So as entities, whether you have a state advisory council or a learning council or children's cabinet, these conversations become front and center, and then you start having that kind of conversation there, saying, what do we want in the next iteration of the report? What would help me go to the next step now? So that's really an important step, albeit a very slow, taking too long. But it really starts nurturing that collaboration that we all want.
Budget target.
Oh, the budget target, yeah. So we did have some concern about that to begin with, and the vice chair of the Senate Finance Committee said to me, I'm a little concerned when this comes out that people are going to go, oh my God, we're spending $1 billion in Medicaid for young children. That's too much. That never happened, fortunately, although a couple people had raised that issue. No one ever had that response. And I think the best way to ensure that it doesn't happen is with the math, because when you show what kind of risk is going on out there and the struggle to get the reach to match the risk, you quickly see that it helps put that money in context. Because otherwise, there is no context. You can't compare it to other states. You don't really know how to give it a barometer for people to say, is this good or bad or what? And so that's why I think integrating the information is so critical, because it helps with that context and clearly send the message that we, within the money that we're using, we distribute it better and smarter, or we need more money. And I'll just finish with this one statement. What happened at a children's cabinet meeting, the state budget director, which in Louisiana is the second most powerful man in the state, the woman now, but when we showed him this, he said, this is exactly the information my staff and I need that we never have. And we make these decisions about money, and we have no idea what's really going on out there in terms of the reach portion. So, you know, people are hungry for this information no matter where they sit on the issue, because they want to make the right decisions, I believe, and they just need the information to do what they need to do in a very difficult job. So I think it can all work out, especially when you have the whole package together, which is what you guys are very close to having.
Thank you.